It is JC and Morgan, powered by Advocare, advocare.com for all of your health needs, workout needs, supplement needs. Go to advocare.com, delivered to your door within days. Promo code Mike Morgan, save 20%, not just today, not just on your first order, but on several orders. Everything from the Spark products, Rehydrate. Had some listeners that have used the sleeping gummies to help them get some shut-eye. That's always important as well. Advocare.com. Visit it today. Our visit with Phil Steele has been an annual thing for years and continues. It's a tradition unlike any other. So is his magazine. This snuck up on me, Phil. The 31st edition. I always tell the story about when I got mine accidentally at a sports radio station because it went to the country station, and the country DJ is like, "Hey, Bo, I don't need this, man. You want it?" I said, "Yeah, it's a football mag. I'll take it." And I looked at it, and I was like, "Holy smokes, this is unreal." And you've been the standard ever since. So welcome aboard, and thank you for stopping by.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mike. And, back then there was, 30 magazines on the newsstands?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
now we've dwindled down quite a bit, but we're still selling strong. We actually sell more magazines now than we did back then.
Isn't that crazy? And the magazine has only gotten bigger and better and more comprehensive. I got mine at a Barnes & Noble, over 350 pages, as it were. So what I love about your magazine, I always talk about this, it's the information. Now, you do predictions as well, and we'll get into some of that, but I'll be honest with you. I'm less about predictions by anybody and more about the amount of info, which for people in our business is a major prep tool, and just for your average fan that wants to be in the know, it's terrific. So let me, as SEC Media Days are going on, I'm going to zero in on that conference first and just take a look at what you have there, because I think at the top, most people agree on the big three, and it's Georgia, Texas, and Alabama. You have them in that order. Some people have flipped Texas and Georgia, but just about everybody and their grandmother has those three. Where you might differ from a lot of people is that most have LSU 4. You have Oklahoma 4. You are bullish on the Sooners this year, and you also have LSU tied with A&M at number 4, but followed by Florida, Ole Miss, Tennessee, South Carolina, Auburn, Arkansas, Mizzou, Vandy, Kentucky, and Mississippi State. So with that, my introduction to you to expand on the SEC this year as you see it.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Mike, when you look at the SEC this year. I think the most talented team might just be Texas. When you look at Arch Manning, that defense that they have, which is going to be one of the best in the country. And I like the receiving core as well as the running back core. But Texas does have to play Georgia on the road, and I think that's huge. You also have to play Florida in the Swamp, Ohio State on the road. Meanwhile, you look at Georgia, and while this year's team doesn't have the star power of those national title teams that we saw a few years back, they are loaded in talent. And I like the way that Glenn Schumann's bringing along this defense. I think they're going to be an improved defense over last year. Gunnar Stockton brings a run game possibility at quarterback. And last year they had to play Ole Miss, Alabama, and Texas all on the road. Well, guess what? This year their toughest 3 games are Ole Miss, Alabama, Texas, but they get them all between the hedges, and they haven't lost a home game in the last 5 years. So I like the schedule as far as where they get the big games. I think it's better than what they had last year, and I've got Georgia winning the SEC. You mentioned Oklahoma. I've got them as my number 1 surprise team in the country this year. And last year, there was no knocking their defense. Their defense last year held opponents to 87 yards per game below their season average, number 6 in the country. And they've got 9 or 8 starters back on that side of the ball, led by R. Mason Thomas. But offensively, they were poor. Now, why was that? Well, how about 0 returning starters on the offensive line and a receiving core that was down to your top 5 receivers? Clemson 2 years ago had a banged-up receiving core. Last year, the receiving core returned. All of a sudden, Cade Klubnik was one of the top QBs in the country. They've got a much upgraded receiving core. They've got a veteran offensive line. They bring in John Mateer from Washington State and Washington State's offensive coordinator, Ben Arbuckle. They actually have an offense this year, which is something they lacked last year. I think that offense and defense, combined with the fact that last year they only had 3 SEC home games. This year they only have 3 true SEC road games. I'm looking for a much better year for Oklahoma, and I think they could go from 6-7 to making the playoff this year.
A lot of people are really high on Mateer. And I know, looking at your all-conference quarterbacks, you've got Nussmeier, Manning, Sellers, and Mateer. That's a very popular four. Some people have Lagway very high on that, as high as number one, is kind of the top five guys. Your conversations, you talk to a lot of coaches, you watch a lot of film. What was it about John Mateer that you were so high on?
Well, watching Mateer last year at Washington State, he didn't have the surrounding talent that he has here. And he's a guy that can really hurt you with his legs. Like when a play breaks down, this guy can hurt you. But he's also a very accurate quarterback and takes care of the football. So he's got a lot of positives to him. I mean, last year he hit 65%, 29 touchdowns, just 7 interceptions. And he's a guy that runs the football like a running back. So, I mean, that's going to be a unique combination that they have. And I believe, a lot of folks knock Jackson Arnold for what he did last year at Oklahoma. But with no offensive line and no receivers, you're going to struggle. I think with this supporting cast that John Mateer has, you're going to see a really good quarterback this year.
You mentioned Oklahoma as a surprise team. What about some of the other teams that maybe you have ranked higher than most this year in the SEC? As I mentioned, everybody's got Georgia, Texas, Alabama at the top. Most people have LSU not far behind, and Oklahoma is certainly a popular pick as one of the most improved teams. Give me another team or two that you've got your eye on that could really break through this year.
Yeah, I think you have to look for starters at Texas A&M with Mike Elko. I thought Elko did wonders at Duke for 2 years, and I thought he did a great job at Texas A&M last year. They had sort of low expectations coming into the year. All of a sudden, they're playing Texas in the season final with the chance to go to the SEC title game. Now, their finish wasn't great last year, but when I went over the squad last year with Coach Elko, and we were talking about the offensive line, he pretty much had them rated middle of the pack of the SEC. Nothing special. This year, he told me that the offensive line is going to contend for the Joe Moore Award. I like that. They've got Marcel Reed at quarterback. They've got a solid defense. A lot of star players there like Cassius Howell up front of the defensive front. And, this is his second year. We know that second-year head coaches usually take a big jump. They now get their schemes integrated. They know the players, and there's a lot of good factors going for A&M. I think they could surprise some folks this year. And then, you got to look at Florida as well. I know Florida's playing that brutal schedule, as always, just like they did last year. It was interesting when I talked to Coach Napier last year. He said, Phil, I said, Coach, you're playing the toughest damn schedule in the country. He's like, at the end of the year, Phil, it might not be looked at as the toughest. And it wasn't. I didn't rate them the toughest schedule at the end of the year. They were still top 10, but not the very toughest because of the fact they beat Mississippi, beat LSU, and beat some of the teams on the schedule. If DJ Lagway is 100% healthy, and there are questions about the health coming in, but if he's 100% healthy and stays healthy all year, I think Florida could surprise a lot of folks.
Phil, kind of toward, I guess, the projection toward the bottom of the league, Kentucky and Mississippi State both have a lot of new players, a lot. And I know this makes your job hard, but I know you're very thorough. I look at those two teams, and I'd probably pick them the same way, but I have no idea what to expect. I mean, because there's so many portal guys. There's guys from lower levels. There's guys from other schools. There's young players. In your conversations and your analysis, what do we make of Kentucky and Mississippi State this year?
Yeah, I think both teams will be improved over last year. I am not big on teams that do massive transfer or massive turnover in the transfer portal. In fact, if you look at this year's magazine, the one thing that I was getting when I was talking to all the coaches is that I like the teams that have a little bit more cohesiveness, continuity, players they brought in as freshmen that are now seniors on the team, like a Penn State, like a Clemson, like an Iowa State. Those are all teams I think have that team atmosphere. Teams that bring in a ton of transfers, I think it's tough to get that atmosphere. You look at Florida State, for example. It worked 2 years ago, but then last year, once things started going bad for Florida State, maybe that told the fact that they weren't a team, they weren't together, sort of went bad for them that year. So I think, you look at the talent. I like the talent upgrades that both Kentucky and Mississippi State have made in the offseason, but they had some ground to make up. For Mississippi State, they're going to need Blake Shapen to stay healthy all year. They were the worst team in the SEC last year. I think they're better, but they also play a tough schedule. I rate it the second toughest schedule in the country. And if you look at their SEC games, home to Tennessee, at Texas A&M, at Florida, home to Texas, at Arkansas, home to Georgia, at Missouri, home to Mississippi. Which game would you favor him in that mix there, JC?
Probably none.
Yeah, so that's why I picked him at the bottom. And with Kentucky, they also play a tough schedule. They play the number 9 schedule in the country, and they've got home games against Texas, home game against Florida, home game against Mississippi. Those are tough. They're going to have to pick those up. Now, Mark Stoops has done it before, but we'll see if he can do it again this year.
Phil, one of the things that I have, I won't say stolen because I always give you credit, borrowed from you over the last couple of years that I use incessantly on shows such as this is your conference rankings in terms of strength of schedule just in conference play. Because I think the committee does a lot of things that they just don't do very well. And certainly one of those is they have no idea the difference between, for example, a Missouri schedule last year and an Oklahoma schedule last year. In their eyes, well, both teams played 8 games. They are very caveman math-like. They don't see the intricacies of the schedule. We talked about it with Illinois last year compared to some of the teams in the Big Ten. You actually do a chart that ranks the conference schedule amongst the 16 SEC teams. So with that setup, give us the biggest differences between one team or another team's 8 games in the SEC versus the teams at the bottom with the weakest slate.
Yeah, and I think you take a look at the 2 teams that came over from the Big 12 last year, Texas and Oklahoma. And I thought they were actually a lot closer talent-wise than their records were last year. Oklahoma played arguably the toughest schedule in the SEC, and they do it again this year. Their lightest game the entire year is Missouri. There's no Kentucky, no Mississippi State, no Vanderbilt, no teams like that, not even Arkansas. They're playing Texas, Alabama, LSU, 3 of the top teams right out there, Tennessee, Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Auburn. Meanwhile, you go to the very bottom, Texas gets to play Mississippi State, Kentucky, Arkansas, Vanderbilt. And they're only playing one of the real big boys. And when I say the real big boys, I'm talking Texas, Alabama, LSU, and Georgia. And they play Georgia on the road. And that's the only game they'll be an underdog in SEC play this year. So you take a look at those 2 teams. Oklahoma was given the killer slate in the SEC. Texas was given a real good one, as was Missouri last year, as you mentioned, Mike. And I think that really helped record-wise with all those teams.
Yeah, it's a talking point in terms of, I think it's the biggest challenge conference commissioners have today is how do we spit out, whether it's an 8 game in the SEC or a 9 game in the Big Ten, how do we spit out an equitable schedule? And you have to do some guesswork there because you can't project how some teams are going to do. But I think there's certainly room for improvement there. Nationally speaking of the Big Ten, the last 2 years, it has not gone unnoticed. The SEC has not had a team in the national championship game. And it looks like based on your preseason top 40, I see Penn State 1, Clemson 2, Notre Dame 3, Texas 4, and then Ohio State 5. You've got 4 Big Ten teams in the Big Ten, in the top 10, rather, including Oregon and Michigan. So safe to say there's the possibility that the SEC might not have a team in the title game again. And I know you're very high in the Big Ten Conference this year.
Yeah, and there is definitely that possibility. And I think when you take a look at the teams, go back and take a look at Texas, for example. They lose 4 offensive linemen off last year's squad. Ohio State loses 4 offensive linemen. I like teams that have a veteran offensive line. Penn State actually has my number 1 rated offensive line coming into the year. And remember 2 years ago, Michigan, they had a lot of players turn down the NFL, opted to return, and they had a senior-laden group, and they won the national title. And then last year, Ohio State, they usually lose 15 draft picks. Well, they didn't last year. All those guys opted to return. They wanted to beat Michigan, for crying out loud. None of them had a pair of gold pants. And while they didn't beat Michigan, they won the national title because they had all that talent returning. I think that's the case with Penn State this year. It's a homegrown team. All these guys were recruited as freshmen, and a ton of them are seniors this year. Drew Alar at quarterback. You've got Singleton and Allen at running back. I think it's the best running back core in the country. You not only have those 2, you've got 2 really up-and-coming guys in Corey Smith and Quentin Martin, who are among the top running backs coming out of high school. They're just waiting in the wings. They'll be the next great duo at Penn State. That's a deep unit. My number 1 rated offensive line in the country. Drew Shelton at left tackle. They got Ione at left guard. And then defensively, they're always solid. And they bring in Jim Knowles. Now, Jim Knowles is not going to improve the defense. If he can just keep them as good as they were last year under Tom Allen, they'll be solid. And they've got Danny Dennis Sutton back at DE, Zane Duran at defensive tackle. I think they're loaded throughout. So Penn State's that veteran, senior-laden team, solid on the offensive line, veteran quarterback, and that's why I picked them number one. First time in 31 years in the magazine, Mike, that I've picked them number one in the country.
Wow. I don't think you're going to be alone on that. I think a lot of people think, if not this year for James Franklin, then when? When do you start winning those big games against the elite in your conference? Because if you do that, you got a chance to beat anybody.
Yeah, and they've been close the last couple of years. Almost. And I think this is the year they break through, Mike.
Let's turn our attention to some of the teams. I mentioned the teams you like in the SEC to be most improved. What about nationally? What about outside the Southeastern Conference? Some teams that could have some major breakthrough years. Who's this year's Indiana, for example?
Well, if you go to the big, it's going to be tough to get at Indiana. Now, Indiana was poor. They had like 3-4 wins for 3 straight years, and all of a sudden we're making the playoff. I don't know if we're going to have a team do that this year. But there are some teams that you don't normally talk about in the playoffs. My best team is Oklahoma, coming off a 6-7 year. But of course, naturally, everybody knows Oklahoma. I think when you look at Illinois with Brett Bielema, I was not blown away with Illinois last year. Yes, they were 10-3, but at the end of the year, I'm like, were they really? I mean, the South Carolina game, we got to be honest with you, it surprised me that they beat South Carolina. I thought South Carolina was a better team than Illinois coming in. Surprised me they won that game. However, this year, he's got 19 returning starters. He's got practically the entire unit back. His offensive line is loaded with NFL caliber guys. Defense loaded with NFL caliber guys. This is a much better Illinois team than they had last year at 10-3. Now, they do have to play Indiana on the road, which isn't easy. They play Ohio State at home, and they play at Wisconsin. But this is a team that could very easily make the playoff this year. And they were close last year, though, at number 16 in the country at the end of the year. I'd keep your eyes on Illinois. And remember, last year, their 7th game of the season, they played the defending national champs, Michigan, at home and beat them. This year in the 7th game, they play the defending national champs, Ohio State, at home. We'll see if they can pull one out there.
Phil, the Big 12, I don't even know why people predict the Big 12 because it's unpredictable. But we do have, I think, a game between two contenders in Dublin, Ireland coming up in week 0 with Iowa State and Kansas State. How do you see that thing shaking out? Who's maybe like last year, nobody thought Arizona State would do that. Who's this year's Arizona State in that league? Are you buying Texas Tech? Just kind of talk about the Big 12. To me, it's highly entertaining. That league's highly entertaining.
Yeah, I think there are 8 teams that have a shot of winning the Big 12.
Wow.
8. Wow.
And you look at Baylor, Utah, Iowa State, Arizona State, Kansas State, Texas Tech, TCU, and even BYU. I know they're losing their quarterback, but I like what they have coming back at quarterback. And the Retzlaff last year wasn't overwhelming. He wasn't the reason BYU was winning. They had the overall team, and they've got the team back this year. So I think they've got 8 teams that have that chance. Now, I think maybe the best teams, the most talented teams, might be Texas Tech, Kansas State, and Arizona State. But I picked them 4th in the league. And you're probably scratching your head wondering why, but it goes back to what Mike talked about, and that is the schedule. Of those 8 teams, Arizona State has to play Baylor, Utah, Iowa State, and even Colorado. I mean, we all think Colorado's going to be down this year, and they will, but that's going to be a tough out on the road as well. That's a tough road schedule for them. Kansas State has to play, as you mentioned, Iowa State in Dublin. They play Baylor on the road, and they play Utah on the road. Those are all tough places to win. And Texas Tech, Joey McGuire's had a great record at home. He's 15-5. He's only 6-10 on the road. They've got to win at Utah, at Arizona State, at Kansas State. So those are some pretty tough games. Meanwhile, you look at the 3 teams I picked at the top. Baylor's road games this year in the Big 12 are Oklahoma State, Cincinnati, Arizona, and they do play TCU. So that's a pretty manageable slate if they take care of business at home. The same thing with Utah, which would be a vastly improved team. They were my favorite to win it last year. Injuries, quarterback situation, close losses, all added up. Kyle Whittingham told me it's his best offensive line he's had in his 21 years as head coach there, and he's had some really good ones. They bring in Devin Dampier at the quarterback spot. They're always solid on defense. And you look at their road schedule, Kansas, West Virginia. They only have 4 road games in the Big 12. 5 of them are at home. They get most of the big boys at home. I think they're a threat. And even Iowa State this year. Cincinnati, Colorado, Oklahoma State are their road games. So I think those 3 teams have the best schedule. And I think at the end of the year, that's going to be the driving factor as to who wins the Big 12.
Yeah, I'm with you on Utah. That's a mulligan year. That was so uncharacteristic for Coach Whittingham, which has been one of the most consistent programs in college football. I think they get back. They got a juicy matchup early in September against Texas Tech. It's a home game. I believe it's week 3. That will tell us a lot about the kind of the hierarchy of that league. That brings us to the ACC. Everybody and their grandmother and their grandmother's grandmother from the dead are picking Clemson. Clemson, I'm looking at your rankings, and you've got them clearly the most talented team in the conference. What else is there to get excited about? Miami was exciting until they wet the bed against Syracuse. There's no Cam Ward there. Florida State hopes to bounce back from a 2-win season. Can SMU be a great story again? And then what? What are we looking at with the Atlantic Coast Conference in 2025?
Yeah, and Mike, I think when you look at Clemson, you look at that offensive line. I rate it number 2 in the country. Cade Klubnik, my number 2 receivers in the country. And last year's defense, that was not Clemson's defense normally. I mean, 374 yards per game. They didn't play like you would expect Clemson to play. Tom Allen steps in. He's got 9 returning starters, a ton of talent. Look at the NFL talent they got on the D-line with Peter Woods and Capehart, at linebacker with Woodaz and Brown. This is a loaded defense. I've got Clemson running the table this year. But I think the top contenders are SMU and Miami. Rhett Lashley has done a great job building this team. He's got Kevin Jennings back. His offensive line looks really good. He's got a couple of NFL players in there, and P.J. Williams, Logan Parr, maybe even Addison Nicholas. And defensively, he's brought in some good transfers. They get the big game against Miami at home. Now, they do have to play Clemson on the road, but the fact that they play Miami at home was why I gave them a slight nod over Miami. With Miami, Mario Cristobal's hitting the portal hard. When I was on the phone with him late in the process, we're talking about late May, I was talking to him. He was still looking for players and bringing them in. So they've got talent. Carson Beck should have a really good year. I think he'll have a fine year. The offensive line looks really good. And, last year, their secondary was so banged up, they were dropping their defensive ends in coverage, and Ruben Bain and Messidor. Those guys can be able to attack the ball. Miami's a clear threat. I think if you're looking for a surprise team this year, one nobody's really looking at, Georgia Tech. I mean, Georgia Tech the last couple of years under Brent Key has overachieved. They played the brutal schedule, and they've gone 7-6 and 7-6. Well, this year the schedule lightens up a little bit. I think they could be a factor in that ACC race. I do believe Mike Norvell will have Florida State back in the mix this year. And then one team to keep an eye on, and part of it's due to the schedule, is North Carolina. We got a guy, you might have heard of him before, Bill Belichick, one of the greatest head coaches.
I know his girlfriend well.
Yeah. And you look at their schedule this year, they're playing Duke at home, Stanford at home, Virginia at home. They do play Clemson at home. They'll be a dog. But look at the road games: at Cal, at Syracuse, at Wake Forest, at NC State. It's really a manageable schedule. They avoid most of the big boys in play. I think it's a gift for Coach Belichick in his first year. The non-conference slate's winnable. If they knock off TCU in the opener, this is a team that might be favored in maybe 10 of their games this year. So watch North Carolina sneak up on some folks. And especially if Bill Belichick gets them going early, the team will completely buy into that. And they've brought in a lot of transfer portal guys.
I didn't realize till you just rattle that off how easy that slate is for Chapel Hill. That is a gift. Phil Steele is on with us here on JC and Morgan. Phil, you're always kind of ahead of the curve on certain metrics that you kind of fall in love with that help tell the story. Is there anything in the last couple of years that you've gravitated to more? Whether it's turnover margin or offensive efficiencies, or something that lately you think is a better barometer to speak on how teams are going to perform during the year?
A new one that I added to the magazine this year is the yards per game, and it really has a good effect. There are teams that maybe outgain their opponents by 50 yards per game, but finish 2-6. Those are the ones that are really under the radar. They didn't get outplayed at the line of scrimmage. They outplayed their opponents at the line of scrimmage. Like, for example, in the NFL, the San Francisco 49ers. Last year they outgained teams by 59 yards per game, yet they were 6-10 because they were minus 10 in turnovers, had all these special teams. They had the number 3 or 4 defense in the country yard wise, but they gave up a lot of points to do the other stuff. So you see those teams rebound the next year. And that might be one of my favorite ones. And the other thing that it really struck me this year, Mike, and it's been going over the teams with the coaches the last 2 years, I'm going more with the continuity of the teams, the ones that use the transfer portal, but only to add to their team. The majority of their players were recruited by that team. Even Ohio State last year, they had some marquee transfer portal guys, but the bulk of that team recruited by Ohio State, played at Ohio State. They were a team coming into the year. And I went with a lot of that. Clemson in the ACC, Iowa State in the Big 12. And you look at Army and Navy last year. Who expected Army and Navy to do what they did? They don't use the transfer portal, and they did well. There's something to be said for that team atmosphere and the cohesiveness.
Heisman Trophy, who do you like?
I'm going with Klubnik. You look at that offensive line, you look at the receiving core, you look at the numbers he put up last year, and then when you throw in the schedule, I've got Clemson favored in all 12 games. So you're looking at a quarterback that could very well be leading the nation in passing at the end of the year, playing for an undefeated team. And that's the mix for winning the Heisman, isn't it, Mike? So I'm going to go with Cade Klubnik at Clemson.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at your list, and I think it's consistent with whatever. Like last year was the aberration. You had the two-way freak, and everybody was enamored by that. And a wide receiver DB got the trophy. Jeremiah Smith is the only guy you have, and I think most people would have in a cesspool of high caliber quarterbacks that are going to be the leading vote getters for this award, unless there's. I don't see an Ashton Genty this year anywhere, so I don't see a running back, and I don't see another wide receiver really that would be in the discussion. So there's a good chance we're going back to quarterback for the Heisman Trophy.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Heisman voters, Mike, probably were thinking, hey, I'd like to vote for somebody that's not a quarterback this year. Well, they don't have that thought anymore.
Right.
We got one in that wasn't a quarterback, so now I think it goes back to normal.
Phil, in closing, tell everybody how they can get the guide.
Well, I appreciate that very much, Mike. The magazine's 360 pages. I feel it's got 3 to 4 times the amount of information any other magazine out there. It's like getting 136 media guides rolled into one. Everything you need to know about any of the 136 teams. Now, it's only available at 2 locations, Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. Those are the only 2 brick-and-mortar stores you can get it, but they do have plenty of them on hand. They usually start selling out by the end of July, so get to Barnes & Noble or Books A Million, or you can go online at philsteele.com. And when you go online at philsteele.com and order the magazine, I'm going to charge you a shipping charge. It costs to ship things. It's like $10 to ship a magazine nowadays. However, I give you the digital magazine absolutely free when you purchase the hard copy, and the digital magazine gets updated all the way until September. So if any players get lost during the month of August, they'll be circled in the magazine. You'll be up to date. So Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, or philsteele.com.
And how many TVs will be on in the Steele household in a typical college football Saturday?
Yeah, here at work, I got 12 TVs in front of me, Mike. So I'm watching 12 games all day long on Saturday. A lot of Diet Mountain Dew goes into that. It's keeps me active all day long.
The only other person I can think of that would have that type of setup, Ace Rothstein from the movie Casino, the former odds maker back in the day. You run a legitimate business. His maybe not so much, but nevertheless, and you're not killing people, which is a good thing, Phil, because we don't want to see you in prison. You can't put this guide out from Cell Block 9. Phil, we always appreciate it. The tradition keeps on going. We love the guide. We always talk about the guide, and we always love talking to you, my friend. Thank you so much, and we look forward to chatting again soon.
Hey, sounds great. One of my favorite shows I do every year, Mike. So I appreciate you having me on. Thank you, guys. JC, good talking to you.
Thanks,
maybe we'll make the Twitter follow list of that you got in the guide this year. Maybe we can sneak on page like 27 below Kevin Frazier of Entertainment Tonight or something.
I will make sure you're on there next year, no doubt.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, Phil. Phil Steele, everybody. Phil Steele of the Phil Steele College Guide. Man, it's we can.